By evening, the temperature dropped sharply, leading investigators to withdraw from the ridge temporarily. The bench remained behind, quiet beneath the cooling sky, its untouched lunch still waiting as though the couple might return. But the final discovery made before teams departed ensured they approached the next morning with heightened caution. In a photo taken by a ranger documenting the bench from a distance, a subtle distortion appeared behind the tree line, a faint ripple like heat rising off pavement. It wasn't light, wasn't shadow, but something in between, bending the space in a way that suggested movement from something that should not have been able to move like that. And it existed exactly where Brooke had turned her head in the final camera footage. Just before nightfall, a ranger reviewing the day's images noticed that the distortion behind the trees seemed closer in each frame, slowly, subtly shifting toward the bench, as though something had been watching the couple and was now watching the investigators too. Brooke Heldon and Marcus Vance were not the kind of couple who disappeared quietly from the world. Their lives were rooted in routine, consistency, and a shared appreciation for simple adventures that never reached beyond the boundaries of safety. Friends often described them as steady, grounded, and remarkably in tune with each other. Their relationship had begun 5 years earlier in a photography workshop in Portland, where Brooke had signed up to expand her creative hobbies and Marcus had enrolled to refine his outdoor documentation skills. They were two people who found comfort in stillness, sunlit rooms, early drives toward quiet trails, and weekend escapes from digital noise. Nothing about their history hinted toward sudden, unexplained absence. Everything about them reflected a couple determined to build a predictable and warm life together. Brooke, 29, worked as a junior architect, drawn to clean lines, natural light, and structures that blended with the environment. Her colleagues recalled her gentle precision, how she measured details twice, sometimes 3 times, not because she doubted herself, but because she valued clarity. She carried that same thoughtful approach into her personal life. Her hiking gear was always organized, her water bottles refilled the night before any outing, her maps tucked neatly into the front pocket of her backpack. She didn't take risks, she planned experiences carefully, allowing room for surprise but never danger. That morning on Ridgeview Trail was no different. She had told her mother earlier in the week that she and Marcus wanted a quiet hike, nothing more, her words light and calm, never indicating unease or second thoughts. Marcus, 31, carried a sharper edge, not reckless, but curious in a way that grew deeper with each passing year. He worked as a freelance videographer, producing short outdoor films and promotional clips for travel companies. His fascination with natural spaces wasn't only professional, it was deeply personal. Marcus found peace in landscapes that stretched farther than the city's limits, in trails that curved through forests thick with secrets, in lookout points where the world felt vast and unrestrained. Still, despite his appetite for exploration, he was calculated. He kept emergency kits in his trunk, made copies of trail maps, and never wandered off marked paths. His smartwatch logs from previous hikes showed consistent, cautious pacing, never impulsive bursts into unknown terrain. Together, Brooke and Marcus formed a balanced pair. Where she slowed him down, he encouraged her to step outward. They had developed a ritual of choosing one trail each month to disconnect from the city and reconnect with the quiet. Ridgeview Scenic Trail had been their pick for April, recommended by a coworker who described the overlook bench as the kind of view that feels like a breath you didn't know you needed. The couple didn't question the choice. They trusted recommendations, researched weather patterns, and planned their route days before leaving. They always informed someone of their destination. They always returned before sunset. That was their rhythm. Yet the days leading up to their disappearance carried subtle threads of tension that no one pieced together until after their belongings were found. Brooke had mentioned to a close friend that the woods felt unusually aware during their last short hike, a comment she brushed off as imagination, but one she repeated twice. She wasn't frightened, just unsettled without knowing why. Marcus, in contrast, had spent a few evenings reading articles about local hikers who'd gone missing in nearby state forests over the past decade. None of the cases were tied to Ridgeview, but the region carried a quiet history of unexplainable vanishings. He had grown strangely fixated on the patterns, clicking through old news clippings that highlighted people who disappeared without leaving signs of distress or flight. When asked about it later, his friends said he seemed drawn to the mystery, though his curiosity never crossed into obsession. Their shared notes from the week before the hike captured an ordinary plan: weather forecast, sunrise timing, route checkpoints, compression socks, camera battery life. There was no mention of fear, no indication of second thoughts, no sign they sensed something waiting for them on the trail. Their routine gave investigators comfort at first. People this meticulous didn't simply lose their way. Yet when the untouched lunch and neatly folded jackets appeared on the overlook, that same routine became the reason their disappearance felt instantly unnatural. The meticulous couple would never have abandoned their belongings without intention. They would never have walked away from prepared food. They would never have separated from their gear without a trace. Friends came forward with small pieces of memory that suddenly felt important. A coworker recalled Marcus staring out a window during lunch, distracted by something he couldn't name. Another remembered Brooke mentioning that she felt watched during a sunrise jog, though she had laughed as she said it. Even their neighbor noted that their porch light flickered the night before they left, a detail the couple attributed to faulty wiring, which later felt unnervingly symbolic. These fragments were dismissed individually, but later painted a subtle picture: small shifts in awareness, a shared sense of something just out of sight, like a presence brushing the edges of their routines. Photos from their phones provided additional depth to their final days. Brooke had taken a picture of Ridgeview entrance sign a week earlier, capturing sunlight slicing through the trees behind it. Marcus had saved a screenshot of the trail's elevation profile, seemingly fascinated by the narrow switchbacks leading toward the overlook. Their digital footprints showed excitement, planning, anticipation, not dread. The forest was a place they trusted, a place they returned to again and again to find quiet in a noisy world. Yet sequencing their last known movements introduced a chilling shift. Their smartwatch data showed a sudden stop for Marcus at the midpoint of the trail. Brooke continued a few steps further, then halted as well. The timing was too synchronized to be coincidence. Something had caught both of their attentions simultaneously, something that made both of them pause with unusual stillness. Yet no audio, no message, no note explained what triggered that moment. The final clue from their home offered a deeper glimpse into Marcus's mindset. On his laptop, investigators found an unfinished document titled Patterns, containing a list of missing hikers from the region. Next to Ridgeview, he had typed only one fragment: Overlook might not just be a viewpoint. He hadn't expanded the thought. No one knew what he meant, but the timing of the note, created only hours before the hike, suggested he felt something stirring beneath the ordinary beauty of the trail. Now, with their untouched lunch, synchronized halt on the trail, and mysterious presence captured in a blurred photograph, investigators realized that understanding Brooke and Marcus wasn't just about who they were, it was about recognizing what they sensed before anyone else did. Something had been paying attention to them long before they reached the overlook. When investigators examined Marcus's document again, they found one last line auto-saved in faint gray text, words typed but never completed. If we're right, the overlook isn't watching the valley, it's watching us. The Ridgeview's scenic trail was celebrated for its postcard-worthy image, but beneath its polished reputation lived a quieter, older history most visitors never heard. Long before the park became a weekend destination for hikers and photographers, the land had been avoided by early settlers who documented strange experiences around the ridge. Some described distorted echoes returning from the valley, stretching their voices into unfamiliar tones. Others wrote about sudden cold air, unnatural silences, and the disorienting sensation of being observed from unseen vantage points. These accounts never reached modern brochures or trail guides, yet the land's reputation persisted among those who had walked it long enough to sense its subtle irregularities. Ridgeview wasn't haunted in the traditional sense, it simply felt aware, as if the landscape remembered anyone who lingered too long. Modern visitors rarely noticed the oddities until after they left, recalling moments that seemed insignificant at the time: a quick shiver, an abrupt change in wind, trees that appeared 10 feet closer than they were minutes before. For park rangers, these details became part of the territory, phenomena to observe but not discuss openly. It wasn't unusual for a ranger's log to include unrelated notes that described environmental quirks: a gust of air that moved opposite the natural current, a cluster of birds that refused to land on the overlook railing, a stretch of trail where compasses spun without cause. Rangers chalked these irregularities up to geological activity or atmospheric quirks, but privately, many felt something deeper at play. The trail itself was divided into 3 sections. The first was a gentle, inviting path lined with wildflowers and tall pines, lulling hikers into a sense of calm. The second brought them close to the cliff edge, where the valley revealed its breathtaking expanse, sunlight catching the layered hills like a slow-moving mosaic. But the third section, the one leading toward the overlook bench, carried a different energy. Even seasoned hikers admitted it felt heavier, as though the forest grew denser not in sight but in sensation. The air cooled abruptly, the branches stilled, and the usual sounds of nature seemed to fall away. It was the last place anyone expected a couple like Brooke and Marcus to vanish, yet it was also the place where disappearances, however rare, followed a distinct and troubling pattern. A decade earlier, before digital surveillance became standard on popular hikes, a college student named Elise Warner went missing on that same third section. She had been hiking alone, documenting wildflowers for a botany project. Her last phone image captured the overlook bench from a distance, framed by the ridge's dramatic drop. Her backpack was later found leaning neatly against the bench, much like Brooke and Marcus's jackets decades later. Her lunch containers were sealed. Her notebook lay open to a blank page. No footprints suggested where she went next. The search stretched for weeks, yet no clues emerged. Authorities attributed her disappearance to possible misnavigation, though those who studied the case privately noted the strange parallels with Ridgeview's older stories, those warnings quietly preserved among long-retired rangers. Even more unsettling was the case of a traveling photographer who vanished 2 years before Brooke and Marcus. He had visited Ridgeview to capture sunrise from the overlook, a shoot he had documented extensively on social media. His last post described the forest as still beyond natural stillness, accompanied by a picture of the same overlook that would later hold Brooke and Marcus's untouched lunch. When he failed to check out of his lodging, investigators found his tripod standing upright near the railing, camera missing, straps neatly tucked in as if arranged intentionally. No signs of disturbance, no signs of escape, just an eerie repetition of careful placement that left more questions than answers. Rangers who had served the park for years quietly referred to these disappearances as the echoes, a term exchanged only among staff who had witnessed the trail's shifting behavior. Some believed Ridgeview held geographical anomalies, magnetic pockets, or underground structures that distorted sound and perception. Others described the trail as something closer to a threshold, a space where the distance between reality and something else thinned unexpectedly. The overlook bench in particular seemed to anchor this strangeness. It sat at the edge of a natural amphitheater of rock and slope, amplifying the smallest noises yet swallowing others entirely. Sound patterns recorded there rarely matched wind direction, often bending unnaturally toward the bench before fading abruptly into silence. When investigators reviewed Ridgeview's maintenance logs, they noticed discrepancies. Trails were occasionally marked as temporarily closed, despite no recorded reason for closure. Certain sections were cleared more frequently than others without documentation. A handful of logs were missing entire time periods. One ranger report from 6 years earlier hinted at a shift in terrain overnight, a section of path appearing wider in the morning than it had the previous day. The report was dismissed as measurement error, but everyone involved sensed that something about the land resisted stable definition. Those who hiked Ridgeview at dusk often reported a strange experience near the third section. Their footsteps seemed to echo even when the ground was soft, and shadows stretched in directions inconsistent with the setting sun. Once, a group of hikers claimed the distant hills seemed to retreat as they approached the overlook, as if perspective had been altered without physical change. None of these experiences were dangerous on their own, yet when layered together, they pointed toward a trail that behaved in ways no map could capture. Brooke and Marcus, in their careful planning, would not have known this deeper history. Online guides and park websites portrayed Ridgeview as a charming, scenic, perfectly manageable trail. Reviews praised the overlook bench for its tranquility, rarely mentioning the strange heaviness some hikers felt in their chests near the final turn. Even their co-worker who recommended the trail likely sensed nothing unusual during their own visit. Ridgeview didn't reveal its oddities to everyone, only to those who paused long enough to notice, and Brooke and Marcus, as quiet observers of nature, fit this pattern more than most. In the search for the couple, investigators deployed drones across the ridge. While reviewing the first day's footage, they stumbled upon something that deepened the mystery. In a wide aerial shot of the overlook area, the drone captured a figure sitting alone on the bench at dusk. The silhouette was motionless, posture upright, hands resting on the seat. The team assumed it was a hiker resting. But seconds later, as the drone adjusted focus, the bench appeared empty. No movement, no departure. The figure had vanished in the space between two frames. Some believed the distortion was a drone glitch. Others saw in the outline a shape too tall, too elongated to be human. This footage became a turning point in the investigation, not because it proved the presence of something unknown, but because it mirrored the same unsettling theme repeating through Ridgeview's history. The bench wasn't just a resting point, it was a boundary, and those who crossed it often didn't return. As investigators replayed the drone footage late into the night, they finally noticed something buried deep in the video's shadows. A faint, second silhouette standing behind the bench, watching the ridge, long after the first figure was gone. The overlook bench, a simple wooden structure positioned to frame the valley like a living photograph, had never appeared so deliberate or so unnerving as it did the morning search team's first approach it. Everything Brooke Holden and Marcus Vance brought with them remained arranged with an unsettling precision that contradicted every natural explanation. Their lunch containers, sealed and spotless, sat aligned on the bench as if waiting for hands that never returned. 2 water bottles, one slightly chilled, one untouched, stood upright without the slightest tilt, as though positioned by someone who understood their weight but not the concept of hurried movement. Nearby, their jackets lay folded side by side with a symmetry too exact to be accidental. The scene felt staged, but staged by intentions beyond human logic, as if time itself had paused around the couple's belongings and refused to resume. When investigators leaned in to examine the containers, they noticed something peculiar. No condensation had formed inside the fruit box despite the fluctuating temperatures between morning and afternoon. Perishable items remained fresh longer than expected, showing no signs of exposure to natural heat or insects. Not a single ant or fly had touched the food, a detail that unsettled several rangers who had never encountered untouched meals left outdoors for that long. The immediate area surrounding the bench carried a strangely sterile quality, devoid of typical outdoor disturbances, as if the environment had held its breath since the moment Brooke and Marcus vanished. The bench itself held its own story. When forensic specialists pressed light fingerprint dust across its weathered wood, faint palm imprints appeared, one larger, one smaller, directly beside each other. These prints weren't smudged or hurried, they carried the weight distribution of people resting calmly, absorbed in the view. There were no signs of scrambling, no deep pressure grooves that suggested sudden movement. Instead, the impressions looked as if the couple had rested their hands gently before standing up with slow, measured intention. To the investigators, this detail contradicted the notion of panic or flight. Something interrupted Brooke and Marcus, but whatever it was, it did not trigger fear in the traditional sense. It was as if they rose in response to something they understood or something they could not resist. As specialists expanded their search, they noticed more irregularities. Static charge readings spiked around the metal screws that fastened the bench to the ground. The screws, ordinarily cool, retained a faint warmth that did not match the surrounding environment. When one investigator placed a hand near them, a soft tingling sensation radiated through his fingertips, as though the metal had held an electrical memory. Instruments designed to measure magnetism recorded subtle distortions, not strong enough to trigger alarms, but significant enough to raise questions about environmental interference. These anomalies suggested that the bench had been part of a larger disturbance, one that involved more than just the couple's presence. The ground beneath the bench told an equally strange story. Patches of soil carried circular depressions that did not match typical footprints or wildlife markings. Each depression was wide and shallow, evenly pressed as though an object or presence distributed weight with an unnatural consistency. The spacing between these impressions varied, creating a pattern that appeared intentional but not easily decipherable. Investigators described them as marks from something standing close, circling the bench in silent observation. Yet the soil around Brooke and Marcus's final step points, found not far from the bench, displayed no overlapping prints or signs that they turned to face this presence. The couple had stood, paused, and vanished without leaving any sign of directional movement. The couple's phone, discovered several feet from the bench in a patch of flattened grass, added a deeper layer to the mystery. The last image in the gallery was a blurred photograph captured unintentionally. It showed the ridge's tree line bending in a manner that defied natural perspective. The trees appeared to curve inward as though pulled or distorted by an unseen force. Investigators assumed motion blur at first, but the contours in the image held structure, an organized distortion that suggested something was altering the space around the lens. Even more troubling was the faint vertical shape near the right edge of the photo. It resembled a figure, but lacked defined features, appearing more like a ripple in heat or a fragment of bent light rather than flesh or fabric. Analysts spent hours enhancing the image, but every attempt revealed the same outcome: a human-like outline without substance. The strangeness didn't end there. The air around the overlook felt unusually dense that day, carrying an almost tangible weight. Rangers noted how their own shadows wavered subtly on the ground, shifting at angles inconsistent with the position of the sun. A few described light behaving unpredictably, dimming even when clouds didn't pass overhead. One ranger, with 20 years of trail experience, admitted privately that the overlook felt wrong, as though the space held layers of presence that couldn't be explained. He said it reminded him of old stories from earlier rangers, stories about the trail's tendency to remember certain visitors more than others. In the midst of cataloging the scene, investigators made a small but haunting discovery on the underside of the bench. A thin strand of Brooke's hair and a small fiber from Marcus's jacket were found caught in the wood grain, ordinary residue for any place where people sit. But the fibers were aligned perfectly parallel, as if lifted and set down with meticulous intention. No natural wind pattern could have produced such symmetry. It gave the unsettling impression that something had studied these objects closely, understanding them not as random elements, but as meaningful pieces of the couple's presence. The evidence collected that day painted a picture that defied natural explanation. Every object Brooke and Marcus carried remained untouched, preserved, almost curated. Time had not passed normally around the bench. Environmental behavior had shifted. The land seemed to hold their absence with strange care, as though preventing the scene from degrading into chaos. The couple did not flee, did not struggle, did not take a single step away from the space where they last sat. Instead, it appeared they had been interrupted mid-stillness, mid-intention, mid-lunch, lifted not by force, but by something that removed them from the sequence of ordinary movement. The weight of this realization settled heavily among the team. Nothing about the overlook made sense within the framework of traditional disappearances, and yet everything about the scene spoke a quiet truth. Someone or something had interacted with Brooke and Marcus at that bench, and whatever it was had left no physical trace of itself, only the residue of stillness and a carefully untouched meal. As investigators concluded their first thorough sweep, a ranger reviewing the images captured her attention, drifting toward a detail she had missed earlier. One of the containers in the lunch bag reflected something faint, almost unnoticeable, a blurred, tall silhouette positioned behind the tree line. Its form was undefined, but its placement matched the orientation of the strange distortion captured in the couple's final phone image. When she enhanced the reflection further, she realized the silhouette wasn't behind the trees at all. It was standing closer, directly beside the bench, appearing only in the reflection and nowhere else in the clearing. By the third day of the investigation, the Ridgeview Overlook no longer felt like part of an ordinary forest. Every step taken toward the bench carried a subtle pressure, like moving into a space where sound behaved according to its own rules. Search teams who worked the area described an unnerving pattern, a sensation that the forest had grown quieter the deeper they moved in, as if natural noise retreated from them rather than merely falling still. The wind, usually consistent along the ridge, seemed hesitant, arriving in thin, weakened pulses instead of sweeping gusts. Even the small insects that typically swarmed wooden structures were noticeably absent. The overlook appeared untouched, not because life didn't exist there, but because life seemed unwilling to enter. The first audio anomaly came from a ranger's body microphone. While two investigators documented soil samples around the bench, a faint vibration pulsed through the recording, low, steady, and distinctly unnatural. It wasn't wind and wasn't wildlife. It sounded more like a hum produced deep within the earth, rhythmic enough to feel intentional. The hum fluctuated between soft waves, dropping in volume before rising again, similar to an underwater current pushing against a submerged structure. When the team replayed the recording on site, the hum persisted for nearly 20 seconds before disappearing completely. The ranger who captured it shook his head, claiming he hadn't heard anything in real time. This discrepancy between perceived silence and recorded sound became the first sign that the forest held layers of experience humans couldn't detect without assistance. A secondary pattern emerged later that afternoon when investigators scattered small motion-activated audio devices along the trail. Designed to capture wildlife movements, the devices began registering sharp fluctuations at irregular intervals. Instead of footsteps or rustling leaves, they picked up a series of harmonic frequencies, thin tones layered atop each other like overlapping whispers. The tones were too organized to be environmental interference. Each frequency rose at a uniform rate, hovered for a moment, and then dropped abruptly, almost like a coded exchange. Audio analysts later compared the pattern to sonar pulses, except these pulses originated not from water, but from a forest that should not have been capable of producing such structured sound. The most unsettling discovery involved what the tones reacted to. One device placed nearest the bench picked up a sudden spike in frequency exactly when the team's shadows crossed the seating area. The pitch rose sharply, held, and then ceased as soon as the investigators stepped back. It was as though the sound responded to presence, adjusting its pattern according to movement. The team tried recreating the scenario intentionally, stepping forward and backward to test the audio fluctuations. Each time, the result was the same. The humming rose when humans approached and faded when they retreated, suggesting the forest, or something within it, was listening, reacting, and aware. Wildlife behavior added a second layer of unease. Birds that typically filled the ridge with calls remained distant, circling far from the overlook, as though an invisible barrier prevented them from crossing. Chipmunks and deer, normally visible along the third section of the trail, stayed hidden. Not even a single wing flutter or rustle of small mammals emerged from the underbrush. Rangers who had patrolled the park for years commented on the strange emptiness, insisting the area's wildlife patterns had never been this quiet, not even in winter. One ranger stepped closer to the tree line, expecting at least the faint buzz of insects, but found nothing. It was a soundless vacuum, the type that made the air feel thicker and heavier, as if carrying weight rather than movement. The investigators began to suspect the silence itself was the anomaly, something manufactured rather than naturally occurring. Forests never went completely quiet unless a predator passed, but there were no signs of large animals, no broken foliage, no fresh scat or claw marks, and predators did not produce harmonic hums. Whatever had altered the soundscape around the overlook behaved with a precision and control that did not match any known species or natural phenomenon.
Audio specialists were brought in to analyze the collected data. When they isolated the lowest frequency captured from a device near the bench, they uncovered something chilling beneath the hum. Embedded in the sound wave, almost imperceptible without enhancement, was a faint tremor resembling a human voice. Not speech, more like breath forming a long exhale, wavering with an uneasy rhythm. They examined it for distortions, wind interference, or device malfunction, but the breath remained too consistent to dismiss. It carried subtle emotion, not fear, not pain, but something closer to recognition, as if the breath belonged to someone acknowledging a presence rather than reacting to it. When the analysts slowed the audio further, a second layer emerged. The breath seemed to resonate against another sound, a soft shifting, almost like fabric moving or a body adjusting weight. It was slow, deliberate, and too close to the microphone to belong to any distant hiker. Yet the device had been placed at least 20 feet from the bench, far from where any person could have been without triggering the motion sensor. The implication was unsettling. Something large enough to produce breath-like reverberations had approached the device without activating its primary detection mechanism. As the investigation deepened, a new pattern developed. Whenever teams walked toward the overlook, the forest seemed to respond with a subtle tremor beneath their feet, like a heartbeat hidden beneath the soil. These tremors were too gentle to register as seismic activity, but strong enough to stir dried pine needles and shift small grains of dirt. The tremors didn't follow a predictable rhythm. Instead, they pulsed faintly when investigators neared the bench and diminished as they stepped away. Some hypothesized underground springs or shifting roots, but the precision of the timing contradicted any geological explanation. It was movement with intention, not chance. The most disturbing audio moment came on the fourth day during a routine equipment check. A device placed near the edge of the overlook captured a sound unlike any other, thin at first, then rising slowly as though moving closer. It resembled a whisper carried across a long corridor, muffled and stretched. When analysts amplified it, they discovered something unmistakable: Brooke's voice. Not clear enough to understand, but present, layered beneath the harmonic tones. Just her name, soft, drawn out, and fading into silence. There were no other words, no context, and no explanation for why her voice would appear in a location where she had never recorded anything. The team replayed the audio dozens of times. Each time, the breath caught in the listeners' throats. The audio wasn't a recording glitch, it wasn't interference, it was Brooke, speaking from a place where she was not physically present. And the forest, impossibly, had carried that voice back to them like an echo from somewhere unseen. As investigators prepared to shut down audio operations for the night, a new frequency emerged from the device closest to the overlook, this time deeper, slower, and unmistakably shaped like someone exhaling right into the microphone, even though no one was standing there.
By the time investigators focused their attention on the trail section leading toward the overlook, the mystery had already evolved from an unusual disappearance into something that defied every natural pattern they understood. Forests, even in their unpredictability, left evidence of movement: scuffs in the dirt, broken twigs, displaced pebbles, or footprints smeared by weather. But the Ridgeview Trail behaved differently. It held the last steps of Brooke Halden and Marcus Vance with an almost reverent precision, displaying their path as if engraved intentionally. The footprints did not degrade, blur, or fade the way fresh impressions normally would. Instead, they remained sharp-edged, crisp, and disturbingly preserved, as though the trail itself had chosen to freeze their final moments in place. Specialists began tracing the couple's steps from the trail entrance, documenting each mark with slow, methodical movement. Their footprints traveled in parallel down the narrow dirt path, spaced evenly with the relaxed rhythm of two people accustomed to hiking together. Marcus's prints revealed a slightly longer stride, Brooke's lighter and more controlled. Both sets indicated steady progress, no signs of fatigue or hesitation. For nearly half a mile, the pattern remained consistent, but as the trail curved toward the third section, the quietest, most ominous stretch, the ground began to change texture, transitioning from compact soil to a softer layer of fine dust. In this dust, the couple's steps deepened slightly, signaling a shift in the terrain rather than in their behavior. Everything appeared normal until the exact moment their tracks reached a small clearing where sunlight fractured unevenly through the trees. There, the pattern changed abruptly. Marcus's left footprint settled firmly into the dust, the impact clear and solid. Brooke's next step fell only a few inches ahead of his, capturing her movement in mid-transition. And then, without warning, both patterns ceased entirely.
The ground beyond those final impressions remained untouched. No forward motion, no retreat, no signs that they turned or stumbled. It was as if the couple had taken one last step together and then simply stopped existing within the physical sequence of the trail. Investigators stared at the frozen motion in disbelief, unable to reconcile the clean halt with any known explanation. Not even sudden panic could result in such a clean erasure. A fleeing person left chaos, an injured person left dragging prints, but Brooke and Marcus had left nothing at all. Examining the soil more closely revealed something even stranger. The dust around the final footprints showed a faint swirling disturbance, not footprints, not animal tracks. Instead, it resembled a circular drag pattern, like something had moved air or weight in a sweeping arc around the couple's last steps. The impression was subtle enough to overlook at first glance, but once seen, it carried a chilling implication. Something had circulated around them, perhaps observing, before their next steps vanished completely. The rangers who documented the marks couldn't determine whether the circular disturbance originated before or after the couple disappeared. The lack of drag marks or broken soil suggested it wasn't caused by physical contact, but by pressure or movement that didn't involve touching the ground. Investigators reviewed every inch of soil surrounding the clearing. No footprints belonging to a third party were present, no scuffs indicating a sudden turn or pivot, no signs suggesting the couple slipped into underbrush. Even the leaves and ferns near the trail edge remained undisturbed, as if sealed under an invisible layer of stillness. A forest rarely cooperates so perfectly. Nature is chaotic, yet this trail appeared curated, controlled, preserved in a way that felt intentional rather than accidental. Adding to the growing unease, the team discovered a small anomaly a few feet from the footprint line, a lone pine needle suspended in a spiderweb at an angle that suggested it should have fallen free. The needle hovered unnaturally, caught as if the air around it had held still with force. Investigators attempted to recreate the disturbance, gently blowing or brushing near similar webs, but nothing reproduced the effect. The suspended needle became symbolic of the trail's unnatural behavior, a moment frozen, movement interrupted. The couple's smartwatch records offered another bewildering detail. Marcus's device showed a sudden halt in his step count at the exact time investigators estimated he reached that clearing. Brooke's data mirrored his, stopping only seconds later. But what startled analysts wasn't the synchronized cessation, it was the timestamp discrepancy. Both watches, calibrated and synced during the hike preparation, showed different times of the final steps, off by nearly 3 minutes. This temporal inconsistency suggested something interfered with their internal clocks. Whether environmental or something else entirely, the distortion deepened the growing suspicion that time around the couple's final location behaved in ways that didn't align with the rest of the trail.
Complicating matters was a short flicker captured by a trail-mounted camera located 15 yards away. The camera's feed stuttered for half a second, a blink easily dismissed by casual observers, but when analysts reviewed the footage frame by frame, they found something unsettling. Just before the glitch, the sunlight in the clearing dimmed unnaturally, though no clouds passed overhead. It was as if the light bent or shifted momentarily. Immediately after the glitch, the clearing brightened again. The couple's footprints remained visible, but no moving objects or shadows appeared before or after the disturbance. It was a moment suspended between two realities, a fragment of time where something occurred that the camera couldn't fully process. Investigators also noted an unusual patch of grass a few feet beyond the final footprints. Unlike the untouched soil surrounding it, this small circular area of grass lay perfectly flat, not bent or crushed as if someone had stepped on it, but compressed smoothly, as though a uniform weight had rested on it for an extended period.
The imprint had no defined shape, no heel, no toe, no familiar outline. It was simply a flattened circle, almost too symmetrical to be natural. Specialists suggested several theories: wildlife bedding, soil depression, or human interference, but none matched the pattern. It resembled the circular disturbances seen around the bench, further linking this clearing to the unnatural behavior occurring at the overlook. Investigators returned to the ridge multiple times, hoping weather or time would reveal new information, but each visit reinforced the same eerie reality. The footprints remained unchanged, preserved with an almost defiant clarity while the surrounding terrain continued its natural shift. Leaves fell, wind moved dust into gentle ridges, but the impressions, the final steps of Brooke and Marcus, did not erode. Nature refused to reclaim them. It was as if the trail remembered exactly where the couple stopped, and it intended to keep that memory intact. As more investigators stood at the edge of the clearing, absorbing the unnatural stillness, a quiet tension settled in. The trail did not behave like an ordinary environment. It behaved more like a witness. Something on that ridge had interacted with the couple in ways beyond physical evidence, altering sound, time, and space around their presence. Their disappearance left no path forward because something had prevented them from taking a next step. Late that evening, as the last investigator began to leave the clearing, a faint indentation appeared beside the final footprints, fresh, perfectly round, and forming in the soil as if pressed by an invisible presence watching from inches away. The discovery of Marcus's camera marked a turning point in the investigation, not because it offered answers, but because it held a silence so deliberate it felt engineered. The camera was found resting against a tree trunk nearly 200 feet from the overlook, an odd location given the couple's final steps. Its position was too intentional to be dropped in panic, yet too distant from the trail to be dismissed as an accidental placement. The tripod legs were folded neatly, the strap wrapped tight, and the camera body angled slightly upward as if someone had positioned it to capture a view that no longer existed. Even stranger, the ground around it was undisturbed. No footprints, no drag marks, no signs that Marcus or Brooke had walked there. It was as if the camera had been carried to the tree, set down with care, and then left untouched. When technicians powered it on, they expected corrupted files or a dead battery. Instead, they found nearly 4 hours of continuous footage recorded after the couple's disappearance, a long, uninterrupted stretch of the forest behaving in ways no one on the search team had witnessed in person. The footage began with a gentle sway of leaves, the sort of movement one would expect at the edge of a trail. Then, gradually, the calm shifted. The forest stilled. Branches froze mid-movement, as if the wind had decided to retreat. The air around the lens thickened, visible as a faint shimmer, like heat rising from asphalt on a summer road. Technicians leaned closer to the screen, trying to decode the first subtle signs that something had stepped into the camera's line of perception. The audio was equally strange. At first, only natural ambient noise appeared, soft rustling, distant birds, the faint hum of insects. But within minutes, something new emerged. Slow, deliberate breathing. It wasn't the quick inhale of a startled animal or the rhythmic pant of a hiker. It was measured, steady, and too close to the microphone to belong to anything standing outside the frame. The breath carried no emotion, no urgency. It felt observational, almost curious. Each inhale seemed to draw in the forest itself, and each exhale released a subtle tremor that made the leaves in the distance flutter despite the complete stillness surrounding them. Technicians replayed the clip multiple times, trying to pinpoint the source of the breathing, Yet nothing in the frame moved, nothing stepped into view, nothing cast a shadow on the ground. The breathing existed without a body. And as the footage continued, it shifted in tone, deepening slightly, as if whatever produced it was adjusting its proximity to the camera. At one point, the microphone crackled softly, as if brushed by something passing within inches of the lens. The crackle was faint but intentional, like fingertips testing the surface of the device without understanding what it was. As the first hour of footage unfolded, the forest began to behave unnaturally. Light around the lens wavered in slow pulses, growing dimmer then brighter in a pattern that did not correspond to cloud movement. The shadows beneath the trees stretched subtly, elongating toward the camera even though the sun remained stationary. When investigators paused the video, they noticed slight distortion in the background, thin lines bending along the tree trunks as if gravity had shifted in small, irregular pockets. These distortions did not resemble glitches. They possessed physical texture, the kind created when space itself stretches or compresses in response to unseen pressure. Around the 90-minute mark, a shape entered the edge of the frame, not fully visible, but present in the way one recognizes movement from the corner of an eye. It was tall, motionless, and faintly outlined by a distortion of light. The shape resembled a vertical ripple, like heat shimmering above a fire, except it was too defined, too anchored to be ignored. When investigators slowed the footage, they saw that the ripple had structure, a torso-like width, a narrow curve where a shoulder might be, an outline vaguely reminiscent of a head. Yet there were no details, no edges, no features. It wasn't a figure in the traditional sense. It was a presence, bending the air around itself into a shape that felt almost human. The breathing grew louder as the ripple lingered, resonating in long waves that vibrated through the microphone. The camera's autofocus jittered, repeatedly shifting between the background and the ripple, unable to finalize a focal point. This behavior suggested the lens recognized something with mass, even if the human eye couldn't interpret it fully. As the autofocus clicked rapidly, the ripple seemed to react, its outline tightening, then expanding subtly, as if responding to the mechanical sounds the camera produced. This moment convinced several investigators that whatever the presence was, it wasn't just nearby. It was studying the camera the way a person might study an unfamiliar device. During the final stretch of footage, the forest grew darker, despite the time of day remaining consistent. Leaves on the ground shuddered without wind. The soil vibrated in tiny pulses. The camera lens fogged as though breath or warmth hovered inches from its surface. All these signals suggested the presence had moved closer, so close that only the camera experienced its proximity. The last 5 minutes of the footage were the most unsettling. A faint reflection appeared on the lens glass, not the forest, not the sky, but something positioned directly in front of the camera. It looked like a face without features, smooth and pale, curving inward where eyes should have been. A concave form rather than a convex one. The longer the reflection lingered, the more the fog on the lens spread, as though something cold hovered inches away. The camera trembled slightly, a subtle vibration so controlled that it felt deliberate, almost as if the presence was testing the device's stability. Then came the moment that caused every investigator in the room to fall silent. For a single frame, just one, 2 faint silhouettes appeared in the reflection behind the faceless form. One shaped like Brooke, the other shaped like Marcus. Neither moved, neither spoke, neither existed physically in the clearing. But their outlines lingered just long enough to register in the reflection before dissolving into the fog, as if absorbed by the presence standing nearest the lens. Investigators reviewed the frame repeatedly, searching for an explanation. Glare, overlapping exposure, digital artifact. No conclusion fit. The outlines carried the precise height difference of the couple,
the exact proportions documented in their earlier photos. It was them, or something using their forms. As the footage ended, the breathing stopped abruptly, replaced by complete silence, an instant, unnatural blocking of all sound, as if the forest itself had muted. Seconds before the camera shut down on its own, the reflection changed once more, revealing a single new silhouette leaning closer, taller than the first ripple, sharper in outline, its faceless surface tilted, as if staring directly through the lens at whoever would one day watch the footage.
By the time investigators returned to Ridgeview with the camera footage archived and analyzed, a grim understanding settled over the team. Whatever had taken Brooke Halden and Marcus Vance was not an isolated phenomenon. The presence that appeared in the reflection, the faceless form, the taller silhouette, the unnerving distortions surrounding the camera did not behave like an animal, a person, or even a natural force. It behaved like a watcher, a collector, something that hovered near the boundary between perception and invisibility, stepping into awareness only when it chose to acknowledge human observation. And the overlook bench, long dismissed as a simple rest point, appeared to be the focal point of its attention, a place where the fabric of the forest felt thinner, more responsive, more alive in ways no one could articulate without sounding unhinged. Ridgeview's beauty had always drawn hikers, but now investigators saw it for what it truly was, the calm surface of a deeper, older disturbance. Files on the region's past disappearances grew heavier as investigators revisited old reports. Several cases had long been dismissed as misadventure or wander-off accidents, but small details now stood out like beacons: untouched belongings, abandoned meals, neatly placed gear, and traces of presence without evidence of movement. Each disappearance occurred within a narrow radius around the overlook bench, as if the land itself marked a circular territory. Records from decades earlier described hikers who vanished near the cliff edge, leaving behind unnaturally preserved footprints that weather failed to erode. Journal entries from early park staff referenced strange behavior among the birds, reports of sound collapsing into silence, and claims that shadows stretched unnaturally during late afternoon hours. What had once been dismissed as folklore now aligned disturbingly well with the patterns surrounding Brooke and Marcus. The more investigators studied Ridgeview, the clearer the anomaly became. The overlook was not merely a scenic point, it was a threshold, a boundary where something watched those who lingered, as if measuring their curiosity, sensing their awareness. People who passed through quickly without observing too long appeared to be spared, but those who engaged with the space, who paused to take in the view, who set objects down and gazed outward as Brooke and Marcus had done, those individuals seemed to disappear with chilling consistency. The presence didn't act randomly, it chose, and what it chose were observers. The forensic team returned to the overlook, this time with more advanced tools designed to detect electromagnetic anomalies and structural irregularities in the environment. They recorded significant spikes each time they approached the bench, readings that vanished when they stepped back. Soil temperature, normally cooler beneath shaded forest canopies, erupt abruptly in a perfect circular radius around the bench, as if invisible heat radiated from the air without any physical source. When they tested the sound frequencies again, the harmonic tones returned, layered and complex, echoing faintly across the valley. The bench seemed to operate like an anchor point, a place where the strange hums, distortions, and presences converged. More unsettling was the discovery near the lower base of the bench. Hidden beneath a layer of compacted dirt lay a series of imprints in a shape no investigator could identify. They weren't footprints, paw prints, or markings made by equipment. Instead, they resembled pressure points, smooth, evenly spaced, pressed into the soil as if something with a distributed weight had rested there. The impressions formed a perfect arc around the bench, suggesting that the presence seen in the camera footage had been here long before the couple arrived. It circled the bench the way a sentinel might circle a doorway, scanning for something or someone before stepping into view.
Authorities debated whether to shut down Ridgeview immediately, yet closing the park wouldn't solve what lurked in the forest. The presence had selected this overlook not because humans built a bench there, but because something intrinsic to the land provided a vantage point, a place where observers naturally paused, stared, and opened themselves to its attention. The bench simply gave people a reason to linger. Removing it wouldn't erase the threshold beneath it. Meanwhile, regional records revealed another disturbing link. Disappearances at Ridgeview sharply increased during periods of rapid technological advancement in outdoor photography. Cameras, binoculars, drones, each provided new ways of watching the landscape, and each seemed to make the presence more active. It was as if Ridgeview responded to the intensity of human observation, reacting when people stared too closely, studied too deeply, or brought tools designed to capture what should remain unseen. Investigators theorized that the presence was not drawn to people themselves, but to their intent, curiosity, focus, the act of watching something that watched back. This theory gained traction when an older ranger recalled an incident from decades earlier. A photographer had set up a long exposure camera facing the overlook. When rangers later found the abandoned equipment, the camera had captured hours of distorted light trails, swirling shapes that suggested circular movement around the bench. The photographer was never found. At the time, investigators dismissed the images as faulty exposure. Now, looking at the camera footage from Marcus's device, the parallels were undeniable.
Yet the most chilling discovery came not from past data, but from what investigators observed on their 5th day at Ridgeview. Early in the morning, just as the forest began its slow transition from pre-dawn stillness to filtered light, a ranger returning from an overnight patrol noticed something unusual near the trailhead. A new bench impression appeared in the soil, an outline identical in dimension to the one at the overlook. But there was no bench there, just compacted earth shaped as if something heavy and rectangular had rested on it for hours. Even more unsettling, 2 fresh palm prints appeared at the center of the indentation, one larger, one smaller, mirroring the exact placement of Brooke and Marcus's hands at the overlook. The team rushed to review trail cameras facing the area. One feed captured a faint distortion at dawn, a shimmer like heat rising from desert sand, but suspended above the forest floor. It hovered briefly, pulsed once, and then faded without revealing form. The new indentation remained, perfectly shaped, quietly announcing that whatever had claimed Brooke and Marcus had moved closer to the trailhead. The presence was expanding its reach, or worse, it was waiting. When investigators mapped the position of the new indentation against previous anomalies, a chilling pattern emerged. Each disturbance aligned in a rough path leading from the overlook toward the ranger station. Not random, not scattered, a straight progression, as if something was stepping into the human world one radius at a time. Late that afternoon, while reviewing footage inside the temporary command tent, a ranger noticed a flicker on one of the live camera feeds aimed at the overlook. The bench, previously empty, now showed a faint shape sitting at its center. It wasn't fully visible, more like an impression of a figure, as if light bent around something occupying the space without revealing form. The shape sat still for hours, unmoving, waiting. Just as investigators radioed the nearest team to approach the overlook, the shape on the bench turned, its faceless outline shifting toward the camera, and a second, taller silhouette appeared behind it, looming in the tree line as if waiting for the next observer to come close. The investigation ended without answers, only the unsettling certainty that Brooke and Marcus hadn't simply vanished, but crossed into something the Ridgeview overlook had been waiting to reveal. Their untouched lunch, frozen footprints, and the camera's faceless reflections all pointed toward a presence that didn't chase hikers. It observed them, choosing only those who paused long enough to notice the silence watching back. The trail has since been closed, but rangers still report a faint distortion sitting on the bench at dawn, with two soft breaths captured on nearby sensors, steady, human, and forever just out of sight, as if the couple still lingers where the forest took them. If stories like this make you question what waits just beyond the edge of the trail, you're exactly where you belong. There are deeper mysteries, darker forests, and stranger vanishings we're just beginning to uncover. Every episode pulls you further into the places most people never dare to look. Stay curious, stay aware, because some stories don't end. They just lead you to the next one.